We all kind of feel like justice shouldn't have an expiration date, right? That a wrong is a wrong no matter how much time has passed. Well, it turns out, in the eyes of the law, it's a little more complicated than that.
That's the big question here. We think justice should be timeless, but the legal world? It runs on a pretty strict schedule. So can you actually wait too long to demand what's rightfully yours?
And yeah, the answer is almost always yes. The law has this thing called a limitation period. It's basically a deadline for filing a lawsuit. And if you miss it, the courthouse doors can slam shut. I don't care how solid your case is. It's all about creating some legal certainty.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when following that rule, by the book, actually leads to a massive injustice? Well, thankfully, the law has some fascinating exceptions built right in. Moments where that clock of justice is deliberately stopped or paused, all for the sake of being fair.
All right, so let's dive into our first big exception. This one deals with the ultimate betrayal, a breach of trust.
Let's make this real. I want you to picture a widow. She gives a big chunk of money to her own brother, someone she trusts completely to manage for her.
Now, this isn't just some casual loan. She hands it over for one very clear reason, to pay for her kids' education. That right there is what the law calls a specific purpose, and that detail is absolutely crucial.
But you guessed it, the brother isn't a great guy. Years go by, and she finds out he's been spending the money on himself. By now, any normal deadline to sue him has long since passed. So, is she just out of luck? Is justice totally out of reach?
And this is where the law says, hold on a second. Section 10 of the Limitation Act is an incredibly powerful protection. It basically says that for this exact kind of betrayal, when a trustee messes with property they were given for a specific purpose, the clock never runs out. There is literally no time limit. She can sue him anytime.
Now here's the catch you need to know about. This no time limit rule, it's special. It only kicks in for what are called express specific purpose trusts. Think of an education fund or money set aside to run a temple, things with a really clear goal. If the trust is more general or it's one that's just created by law, like when a court appoints someone to manage a bankrupt person's assets, then the normal deadlines are back in play. So the takeaway is pretty simple. The more specific the trust, the safer you are from that ticking clock.
So we've seen how the law can protect you from a betrayal of trust. But what happens when the person who's been wronged simply can't file a lawsuit? Not because they're lazy, but because they are legally unable to.
Well, the law isn't totally heartless. It recognizes that some people have what's called a legal disability. Now, this isn't a medical term. It just means someone who can't legally act for themselves. The most common examples are a minor or someone of unsound mind. And it just makes sense, right? The limitation clock shouldn't be running against someone who can't even get to the starting line of the race.
So how does this work? It all comes down to a simple question. Can one person in the group legally settle the claim for everybody else? That's what's called giving a valid discharge. So if you have a father and his minor kids who need to sue a tenant, the father can act for everyone, so the clock starts ticking for all of them right away. But what if the father is of unsound mind and the kids are minors? Well, then no one can act, so the clock is paused. It's a way of making sure time doesn't run out before someone is actually capable of doing something about it. Now, this seems incredibly fair, and it is. It's all about protecting the vulnerable. But you can see the problem, can't you? You can't just have these legal claims hanging out there forever. Society needs things to be settled eventually.
And that brings us to the ultimate balancing act. This is where the law's desire for fairness to one person bumps up against its need for legal certainty for everybody else. So, Section 8 comes in and acts as a sort of reality check. It draws two really big lines in the sand. First, it says there's a specific kind of lawsuit where this whole disability pause idea just doesn't apply. And second, it puts a hard limit on how much extra time you can get, even if you had a disability.
So what is this right of preemption thing? It's actually pretty simple. It's just your right to have the first shot at buying your neighbor's property if they decide to sell it to an outsider. The law kind of sees this as a less critical right, so it doesn't get the special treatment of the disability pause.
But that's the side note. Let's get to the main event of Section 8. This is the rule that really, truly tries to balance fairness with finality.
And it all boils down to this number. 3 years. This is the ultimate safety net.
Okay, so how does this 3-year cap work? Let's say a minor turns 18. Boom, their legal disability is over and the clock that was paused finally starts ticking. Now, the law says they get a new window of opportunity to file their lawsuit. They get to pick whichever is longer, the time that was left on the original clock, or a fresh 3 years. This makes sure that nobody is left high and dry with just like a few weeks to figure things out and file a case. It's a really smart compromise, isn't it?
All right, for our last section, let's take this whole thing global. What happens if you make a contract in one country, but you end up filing a lawsuit about it in a completely different country? Whose stopwatch do you use?
Well, the principle that guides this has one of those fancy Latin names, lex fori. But don't let that intimidate you. All it means is the law of the forum, or, put simply, the law of the place where the court case is actually happening. So here's how it breaks down. The rule is simple. If you make a deal in Uganda but you sue over it in an Indian court, you use the Indian time limits. Simple as that. But, and this is a huge but, there is one major exception. If the law back in Uganda doesn't just block your ability to sue after a certain time, but it actually destroys the contract right itself, like it legally rips up the contract so it never existed, then, and only then, will the Indian court say, okay, we'll follow that foreign law, and they'll throw the case out. So, when you pull it all together, you start to see that the Limitation Act is way more than just a simple countdown timer. It's this constant, delicate balancing act. It makes us wrestle with a really deep question. We all know that justice delayed can be justice denied, but the law also knows that sometimes justice absolutely has to be allowed to wait. So it's not just about when the clock stops, but really digging into why.